evaluate kind of our current programs. Who are they intended to serve? What served constituencies exist within the state, and can we develop some recommendations that would at least help guide and direct this new relevancy branch in serving broader constituents. Like I mentioned, largely to date, our biggest challenge has really been capacity of the team, to stay singularly focused and thinking through these kind of difficult challenges. And one note is that we're trying to stand up something new at a time in which the agency is going through massive change and reorganization. And so the capacity of senior leaders within the agency to think critically about and provide direction to a new branch has been somewhat challenging. So hopefully with the addition of these dedicated staff, particularly with Jessica coming on board, her team getting put into place, we'll be able to kind of hit the ground running. And then also in this spirit of learning, and as we've gone through the pilot project timeframe, we've really thought about what can we learn from this. And so part of our focus is going to change just a little bit to really think about what does it truly mean to stand up a relevancy program within a state agency. Not necessarily tackling a specific tactic within the roadmap, but trying to provide that bigger capacity to actually accomplish many of the strategies and things within the roadmap. So we'll be looking at, what's it look like? What's the program mean? As an agency as a whole, we've been struggling with this challenge of how do they communicate? How do we communicate across work areas and branches to know that the work of relevancy isn't just the work of one branch, but it's largely the work of staff across the agency. And so with that, again, I can't tell you how excited we are to have Jessica come on board on Tuesday and then really Wednesday and hit the ground running.
Thank you, Jason. I think a good takeaway there, folks, is the obvious one. There's an agency with a relevancy branch and relevancy branch chief. A few years ago, that was unimaginable. So nicely done, Jason. And give me a head nod if you're going to keep us updated on the community website on how all that goes.
Absolutely.
And we had one question. Someone asked if you'd be willing to share the new org chart based on all that work that y'all did.
Yeah, we've got a really user-friendly generic org chart that shows the way the organization is now structured, that really lines out the role of managing natural resources, but also that whole other section of engagement that really says the agency putting its money where its mouth is in terms of dedicating staff resources and time to engaging the public.
Okay, I'm gonna do one more question just in sequence, and then we'll log the other ones for other conversation. Thanks, folks, for typing them in. Jason, do you have any plans to engage with external voices to inform development of the branch?
That all along was the intent. It's taken us a little more time to get a relevancy chief on board. And so that's kind of the delicate balance, right? How far do you charge out as an agency without having kind of that leader in place to bring them along in the process? So that's kind of been one of the delicate balances, trying not to create something that somebody else has to implement, but let them be part of that implementation.
Very good. All right. Appreciate it again, Jason. Okay, Miss Ann, take it away. Again, Ann Fortune from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Okay. Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Jason. That's really exciting work that's going on in Missouri. And so Florida's roadmap implementation project is to create comprehensive stakeholder engagement plans for 2 of our 6 divisions. And I started with 2 of our smaller divisions just because I didn't really understand or know what, how much time and effort, this project was actually going to entail.
And let me interrupt you there. Folks are asking if you can lean a little closer to your mic, please.
Okay. Like most other agencies, FWC does a huge amount of stakeholder engagement. But we really haven't strategically thought about how we invest our time and resources in these activities, and like who does it, for what purposes. what methods do we use, and how do we actually analyze the information and use the information in our decision-making processes. So what we're expecting from this effort will also surface probably some training needs in terms of things like stakeholder mapping, managing stakeholder conflict, and running effective focus groups. So this project specifically addresses the barrier of that the agency lacks the capacity to identify, understand, engage with, and serve broader constituencies. The strategy is to identify ways to increase the expertise, staffing, and resources that will support those activities. And the tactic is to create this strategic comprehensive plan to engage and serve all current and future constituencies. And like many projects this year, this one got off to kind of a late start, but we've conducted an inquiry of one of our division staff, really to understand how they plan for, implement, and analyze their stakeholder engagement activities, understanding what the methods they use, how important that they even think stakeholder engagement is, their good and bad experiences with it, and what kind of training that they've had. And so I'm pleased to report for at least this one division that they've indicated that stakeholder engagement is really just part of the way that they do business. This is not something that they think of as extra work or that they're checking a box to do it. So I was actually really pleased to hear that. And they're really interested in learning about how do they identify and engage stakeholders that they don't normally hear from, what they call silent stakeholders, particularly from urban Blacks and from our Hispanic communities in South Florida. So the biggest challenge with, at least to date with this project, has been the impact of COVID-19 on my time and my capacity to shepherd this project forward. To date, there has actually been no cost to this project other than my time and the time of staff that filled out my inquiry, probably an hour for each one of them. And then perhaps a week or two for me to really explore the social science and business literature relative to stakeholder engagement activities, and then distill that down into something that's usable for us. So I do envision that there would be a financial investment for FWC to provide some training on things like how to run effective focus group meetings. So at this point, I've drafted a sort of a planning and process plan and checklist for their groups to really explore, really have some specific objectives about their planning and the execution and the analysis of their stakeholder engagement activities. And I've also drafted a guidance document, or maybe a best practices document for staff to help them pick the most appropriate engagement methodologies for the purposes that they have in mind. So in the next month or so, I'm hoping that I'll be able to review those with that group, and then work with our training officer to provide the training that they're interested in. And as we move forward, I'll work with our second division. But I'm really expecting that our stakeholder engagement activities will be much more intentional and much more targeted towards these underrepresented constituencies. And really, as we learn how these groups really want to engage with us, and how we can better serve them. And so one of our first steps, and this actually started about 2 weeks ago, was we'll be meeting with some staff from the Greening Youth Foundation, which we heard about from the plenary session last week. We'll be meeting with them in the next couple of weeks to really engage with that group. So Matt, back to you.
Excellent, Anne. Thank you very much. A lot of work there and a lot of typing on your part in drafting all these documents. I think it's interesting, of all the good work that you did and research you had to provide, it was heartening to hear that, you know, stakeholder engagement to, you know, currently not engaged demographics wasn't a foreign idea to several of the branches. They were just needed to know how, which is kind of the spirit of the roadmap itself, is knowing that you want to try to do something, how do you go about doing it? So that's encouraging, very encouraging. Okay, we'll move on here. Also, just a reminder, I should have said this at the beginning, was that if you want to just focus on the person that's speaking, in the upper right corner of your screen, you'll see the speaker view. If you click on that, just the person that's speaking is the beautiful face you'll be able to see. So just in case you see anybody down the bottom of the screen picking their nose, get the speaker view, and that'll probably be a better experience for everybody. All right, moving on. Let's hear from Nevada. Jen Newmark with the Nevada Department of Wildlife and what you all are doing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Newmark, and I am the Wildlife Diversity Division Administrator for Nevada Department of Wildlife. And I also was one of the coordinating team members for the Relevancy Roadmap. And we got involved because Nevada has long recognized the need to engage with new and broader audiences to enhance our ability to effectively manage our 890 something species that live in our state that we're responsible for managing. So of these species, about 8% of those species generate any income for our department, and that comes from just about 5% of our citizens. So we know that, you know, we're needing to engage with a lot more people, you know, in regards to those other 92% of our species. The America's Wildlife Values Study showed that Nevada is one of the most rapidly changing states in the country with respect to increasing mutualists and pluralists and decreasing traditionalists. We have two really large, one very large urban centers that are increasing our urbanization in the state, and those groups were not necessarily as well connected with as we would with maybe our rural constituents who might be considered the, you know, typical traditionalists. So after the roadmap was completed, our first step was to crosswalk the roadmap with our relatively new, maybe a year or two in, strategic plan. And we found that 11 of the barriers overlapped or were otherwise included in our strategic plan. So that made us feel pretty good that, you know, we at least were acknowledging that there were areas that, that we needed to be working on. Our agency leadership facilitated leadership conversations, and we all as a leadership team agreed that it was critical for our department to maintain relevancy and to increase it. So I think having our leadership team all on the same page and recognizing that we had an issue and then agreeing that we wanted to work on it and make it a priority was really important. We recognize that the biggest challenge to maintaining relevancy was internal challenges, with most of our staff not aware or engaged with relevancy. So, you know, we're a relatively small Department of Wildlife, something like a little over 250 employees, and everyone is wrapped up in their own duties. A lot of them are field biologists, and relevancy to them seems to probably have a little impact. You know, they're worried about just getting out there and doing, you know, their job every day. And I think they might feel like this is a leadership problem to solve rather than an agency department-wide problem to solve. And then we also recognize that we have challenges with external engagement as well. And so we know from all kinds of studies and just our own experiences probably with our kids that, you know, as a department, we're competing with a huge amount of other interests in engaging our public. You know, they're wrapped up in sports, they're wrapped up in social media, just all kinds of changing issues that we all struggle with. And then for NDOW, we felt like we really walk a fine line between extreme groups on both sides, and they're both pressuring our agency, and yet we miss that engagement with the vast majority of the middle. And so our director likes to say it's the tails wagging the dog, and that's really true, because you know, those squeaky wheels are the groups that have the most outsized voice with our agency, yet they're a relatively small group compared to the middle. So to help address the internal challenges, we held a 3-day leadership conference with about half of our agency attending. And during this conference, we really kind of treated it as an opportunity to just have like a really large group conversation. And we started with leadership, sharing our personal stories about why we're passionate about our jobs. Why do we become wildlife biologists? What do we, you know, what makes us tick? And I think that vulnerability and that personal sharing really created the opportunity for others to jump in. And there was just, I mean, not a single person that I could see in the room was not engaged and was not listening, which I think was really incredible. And then we asked the staff to visualize, what does the department look like in 5 or 10 years? And are the things that we're doing now going to get us to that vision in 5 or 10 years? And so people were just super engaged with it and very enthusiastic. And one tangible outcome was, can we create an internal relevancy team? So that conference happened this past January and February, but unfortunately, some of that momentum has stalled. And of course, COVID plays a huge role in that loss, but it's really the everyday tyranny of the urgent that's our biggest challenge to overcome. And Jason mentioned this a little bit too, is, you know, when we have time to really dig in and think about this, we're all engaged and we recognize the priority of it. But then some urgent, you know, issue of the day comes along and then we get sidetracked. And so we just really lack capacity to dig into these things as we really need to. One successful piece that I think was critical at the beginning was that we had a person dedicated to pulling us all together. We were really lucky to have Elsa Hubble come and do a detail at our agency for 2 months. And because we knew that Elsa wasn't going to be with us for, you know, longer than a couple of months, we really made it a priority. And I guess one of the take-home lessons for me was that where there's a will, there's a way, and we all somehow managed to kind of shuffle the issues of the day. And so I think that was a really key piece there. Just quickly, because I know I'm talking for a long time, but we are moving forward, hopefully with an internal relevancy team. I think COVID has put a lot of stress on the agency, and so we might have that team be focused more on employee morale. But I think if we structure it right, it would be a group that could easily pivot to agency culture issues down the road. And I think we'll be able to tackle some of those main things. And then just one main lesson that I learned through all this that I think is worth sharing is that I think we all go into these conversations about relevancy with some preconceived idea, whether it's, you know, how people will accept the roadmap or will they think it's important. And I learned in that leadership conference that people really do get engaged when you ask them questions and you ask what's important to them, and then you actually listen to it. And I was surprised. I thought that they would react like leadership is just cramming this down their throat. But at the end of the day, when we ask them about their vision and how we accomplish that, people from all different parts of the agency were really, really engaged. And I thought that was really important. So that's my spiel, and thanks for listening.
Nicely done. Thanks, Jen. I do want to ask you one follow-up, because this was a question that we received from the pre-survey, or at least it's in line with that question. At the beginning, you talked about the first step you did, and this is a question a lot of folks have. Hey, what's the first thing? How does the roadmap help the planning we're doing in our agency? You described it as you did a crosswalk of the roadmap and your agency strat plan. Could you briefly outline what process you used to do that? Who was involved? How hard that was?
Well, for us, it was relatively easy because Elsa did it for us. So
That makes
she
sense.
read our strategic plan, and then she was able to recognize which ones of the barriers were already in our strategic plan. But then as a leadership team, we took those results and we discussed them and we talked about them. And I think it was a relatively logical first step that I'm not sure maybe we would have thought to do if Elsa hadn't just kind of jumped in on that. But I think the conversation that we had around it was almost more important than the actual crosswalking of it, because we realized that we had already been thinking along those lines. And it was really more a matter of, okay, this is twice now that these things have come up. Let's kind of start thinking about where we really want to see our agency go, and having that real conversation at the leadership level, I think, was important.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Ann.
I can interrupt it. So there's a question in the chat that, do you have any specific recommendations or strategies to help your traditional stakeholders or constituencies understand the need to broaden out to more constituencies?
I don't know if I have specific strategies other than that continuing relationship with them. And this is something that I think has echoed throughout this entire conference, and any subject that I've been digging into is just that the criticalness of that personal relationship. And we have people in our agency who are well connected with our traditionalists and have good relationships with them. And so engaging them as ambassadors for that group will be really important. I think, you know, it's important to engage with them and tell them why we are moving forward with other constituents. And I think it's important that they understand that just because there are other constituents doesn't mean that somehow our prior relationships with them are unimportant or suddenly going to be swept under the rug. But I think, again, just that constant conversation, that relationship building, that engagement with them is going to be really important.
Very good. Well, we are doing great on time, and I like just having this conversation as we go here. Sarah, before we get to you, I want to throw out one of the weird and wacky questions from our relevancy survey for all of the previous speakers, because I think this is a very good question, and also humorously stated. So for all the previous speakers, here's the question from our survey. What is the real end game of becoming more relevant using the roadmap? Is it more backpackers that equal eventual backpacker tax? General appreciation that equals a sales tax? Or that we all just feel better and maybe go to heaven? We need a concrete objective to launch any kind of real relevancy effort. So let's start with Jason. Jason, I guess, how do we get to heaven, or how do we do good relevance?
I think it's a pretty simple answer to me. It's more individuals engaging in conservation actions. I think if we look at the way the past has been, and largely our hunters and anglers have been the ones who we as state agencies have pushed in that direction. We see more and more individuals doing it for varying reasons, and with declining participation, folks valuing outdoors and our natural resources in different ways. That's the way we save and protect the things that we all value and care about and think makes the world a better place to live.
Ann, what say you?
I totally agree with Jason, and I tend not to look through an economic lens on these types of things. And so I think it really is just increasing the awareness of people in general, everybody, the benefits that they receive from conservation, you know, the work that we do. And, you know, frankly, I'm not really concerned about if they actively participate in wildlife related activities. It's great if they do, it's wonderful if they do, but as long as they support the activities that conserve fish and wildlife and their habitats, I think that's the end game. And however they do that, either through active participation or voting for, you know, legislative candidates that are interested in those issues. You know, there's a lot of ways that people can really engage in these activities without actually participating. So, so yeah, I think it's the more general, you know, how do we increase awareness of the benefits that everybody gets from conservation of fish and wildlife?
All right, Jen, give us your 2 cents.
I think that, you know, just echoing what Anne and Jason have already said, that stronger support for conservation ultimately makes us more successful in, you know, conserving wildlife and wild places. And I think depending on where each of us are in, you know, the country and within, you know, our own particular states or countries even, you know, how that translates into an end result, it can be, you know, increased political support, increased financial support. But at the end of the day, if more people are engaged with conservation, we will be able to better conserve the wild resources that we all care about.
All right, I'm telling you all, there's like bumper stickers and t-shirts worthy of quotes in here. I hope y'all are writing this stuff down. All right, let's move right along. Got some more questions here, but folks, don't rely on me to ask the weird questions from the internet because, you know, anonymity does crazy things to our brains. So think about other thoughts you have while you have this wealth of experience and folks that have been thinking about this for years. Throw those questions up in the chat. We'll try to get to those as we go along. Our next speaker hails from North Carolina, Sarah Schweitzer from the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. Sarah, tell us the good news.
Thank you very much. I hope y'all hear me okay. This has been a really crazy day for me, and I haven't had any time to really mentally prepare for this. I've driven to Raleigh and back so far with computer issues. So my day started at 4:30 this morning, and I will do my best. But also I saw in our little squares here, people from North Carolina. With us, we have Fallon Owens and Chet Clark and Scott Anderson. So several of us here from North Carolina. And the people who are not on here who helped with this process are Anna Barkefer, Mallory Henderson, and Kevin Dockendorf. So we have a group of us who've worked on these efforts. So just a little bit of background. Staff from our agency created a diversity task force in 2018, and we drafted a strategic plan. And this was shortly after our agency created a leadership development program. And so most of the people in this group came from that program. And within that, we kind of replicated the NCLI process where you identify projects or concerns you might have for your agency. And the biggest concern, a lot of overlap, was this diversity, inclusion, equity type concern. So we came out of that to form the strategic plan. And by late 2019, we changed the name of this group from a diversity task force to the Partnership for Inclusion. And yeah, Fallon she's gonna be able to share some of this information, so that's great. So Fallon's gonna be sharing a little bit of information here. So within this Partnership for Inclusion and our strategic plan, We also got assistance from our diversity outreach specialist, Liana Yerka, and we sent out a survey to our staff and our agency just to see where staff were on these ideas of diversity and equity in topics such as that, and people who use natural resources beyond trapping, hunting, and fishing. So we had some background information from our agency. And within our strategic plan, we incorporated those thoughts, but also we put in a vision statement, a mission, rationale, and values, and we had 3 main goals. We've created 3 working groups each related to each of these goals, and there you see internal enrichment, engagement, diverse audience, and foster the next generation. We have a 5-person steering committee that keeps this work going forward. And that steering committee is a main communication with our senior staff and director's office. So after putting all this together, the director's office is probably getting curious what we're up to. So this is a staff-led work. So we met with the director's office and director's staff, and went over the strategic plan with them and our desired outcomes from the work groups. And we got their approval to move forward, and what we had put on maybe an hour and a half meeting ended up being a 3-hour meeting discussing, the survey outcomes and our strategic plans and all the details associated with it. So we really got great engagement from the director's office at that point. And we also, right about the time we were meeting with them and we'd finished all of our details, is when the relevancy roadmap had been completed by AFWA. So we were able to look at it, and we didn't do the detailed crosswalk like y'all mentioned earlier, but we were able to see that without having knowledge of what was going on with the relevancy roadmap in detail, that our strategic plan matched it quite closely. And so it's kind of surprising, but also kind of a neat outcome that we were matching that thought process so closely. So when the opportunity came available to apply for a grant for assistance in implementing parts of this strategy associated with the roadmap, we really jumped at the opportunity and submitted our proposal. And we're focusing on agency culture barrier 1, strategy 1, and steps 1 and 3. So we decided that we wanted to focus on steps 1 and 3 because our survey data and other information we had from our agency indicated that we wanted to look at our agency structure and kind of step back and look at how we're structured and how we were inviting or not to diverse audiences. But also, we also realized that we needed to look inward as well and get a better grasp on how our staff understand things like implicit bias and equity and inclusion and ideas such as that, and some barriers that some audiences or some of our constituents may face when trying to engage our career or some of our activities of our agency. So in doing this, we have now planned 2 workshops for our agency staff to address steps 1 and 3. One workshop will be led by the Wildlife Management Institute staff, and a second one will be led by the Management Assessment Team of AFWA. And as you see here, some of the things that we want to address: fulfilling the agency's mission, and also the power of diversity and inclusion being the 2 general overarching topics of these workshops. So let's see. We felt like we wanted to really understand the inside culture and our implicit biases and things like that within our agency. So in some of the output from their survey indicated that we really needed to address this, that there was some lack of understanding and even acceptance of some of these topics. So we felt we really needed to get our house in order, so to speak, before we started inviting too many people over to our house. So that was one reason we chose to look inward. But also in fulfilling the agency's mission, we want to look at our mission that was developed, many years ago. And one part of our mission states that we also are addressing outdoor enthusiasts. Well, I'll just read the whole thing just real quick. To conserve North Carolina's wildlife resources and their habitats, and provide programs and opportunities that allow hunters, anglers, boaters, and other outdoor enthusiasts to enjoy wildlife-associated recreation. And it was an indication to us that the other enthusiasts were not getting as much attention as the boaters, anglers, hunters, and trappers. And so we felt we needed to address that portion of our mission. Another stumbling block we may have is that our mission explicitly states that these are wildlife associated recreation opportunities. So we could be, looked at as far as supporting things like geocaching or horseback riding or mountain biking. Those could be outside our mission, depending on your interpretation of it, because those activities, although they could occur on some of our agency lands, they aren't explicitly wildlife associated. So there's some discussion there and looking at our agency's mission and where to go from there. So we've had some good discussions with we have a brand new director, and so bringing him into this work. And so discussion about our mission statement and its limitations, and whether we either need to change that or we need to look at our partner agencies such as state parks to achieve some of those other types of activities. So that'll be a good thing for us to look at. Also, the statute that created our agency was last amended in 1964. And some of the activities that our agency participates in now are not listed under that statute. Rather, they're included later. Things such as boating access and boater education and things like that weren't originally or were not in the original statute. So I had some discussions with our new director about that also, and where as an agency we might need to revisit our statute. That statute, of course, the last amended in 1964. So there are a lot of things changing. So this. What we plan to do with these workshops to really help us look at our agency structure, some of these questions that have come up. There seem to be some concerns among our senior staff about some of these challenges to our mission statement, and how to select staff to participate in the workshops. So we've met some challenges there with those topics, but also, of course, another challenge we've faced is getting our workshop timing set back quite a bit because of the COVID-19 concerns and restrictions. So although these would be best held in person, we're now moving those to being virtually led. And actually having participated in the North American Ornithological Congress and AFWA and NABC, and I've found that we can do a pretty good job of doing it virtually now. We've figured out how to do a lot of this. So it won't be as great as being in person, but I think it will help us achieve some of our desired outcomes pretty well. So those are a couple challenges in addition to those discussions on our agency mission and our what we should do as an agency and moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And for someone who's been up since 4 and dealing with more important real life issues, you're remarkably lucid, more so than I am after 3 or 4 cups of coffee. So nicely done. You can take a nap after this, but that was very good. So I want to make an observation. So we've got about 20 minutes here, and I want to leave plenty of time for Miss Elsa for sure. But one thing that I've noticed listening to our speakers here is that there's multiple answers to a question that pops up a lot in regards to the relevancy roadmap. I hear it when we have these conversations. I saw it on the survey. We've seen it in another questionnaire. And that is, How do you get started? So all of our speakers, if you'll notice, took slightly different roads that were very dependent on their agency. So Sarah just talked about starting the process by looking inward and recognized, okay, before we do a whole lot, we've got some work to do inside. We need to understand as an agency why we're doing what we're doing. We need to understand about D&I issues, and we're going to start at that level. When you hear how Jason started with, you know what, recognizing we need a large-scale strategic move in this, as well as a staff branch chief that their job is just to do this. Jen started with the crosswalk of the strat plan and the relevancy roadmap. So the point I'm trying to make here is that, unfortunately, and many of you probably won't like this because it's not an easy button, there is no one way to get started on this stuff. But that's why the relevancy roadmap was written the way it was, is that is essentially the buffet of potential problems you might be facing as an agency in this work. And your job is to first look at that, ideally with the team of the right people in the room, and say, hey, as an agency, where do we need to start? So there's plenty of places to start. And I'm not going to say one is the right approach versus the other. This whole relevancy roadmap thing is a facilitative document to help you, written broadly enough that we can hopefully incorporate all the needs of at least 50 different state fish and wildlife agencies and dozens of conservation organizations who might use it. So recognize that there are multiple pathways, multiple roadways, so to speak. The roadmap provides some helpful signs along that road, but ultimately, it's going to require a little bit of work and thinking on your part. But remember, again, I'm going to push for our community. That's why we all on this phone call, all 111 of us that I can see, we are the group that can move this stuff forward and offer that support to try different things within our agency. So don't be wedded to one action. I would encourage you to take the experiences of all these individuals and think about innovative ways you could start. You could use the knowledge already being gained, or you could use the roadmap to just start some of this work in your agency. Don't try to do everything all in one day. Just start somewhere. Try with one thing, anything you can, because there's going to be a long, slow arc of change, but we can get there, particularly if we support each other. Okay, I'll stop preaching. You all know how I can roll, and let's listen to somebody else that has a lot more experience practically in the past few months. Elsa Hubble from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Take it away, Elsa.
Well, how are y'all? Good to see some familiar faces and some new faces. It's very exciting. My name is Elsa Helbold. I am with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Science Applications Program. And for the past, well, this year, I have had the honor and privilege to serve as chair of our new workplace culture transformation team. And so today I'm going to repeat a little bit what you heard from Ann and a little bit what you heard from Sarah about a project that we're working on. And that is that the service has placed particular emphasis this year on implementation of our diversity and inclusion implementation plan. We're on our third version of this. It's a 5-year plan. It has 3 objectives: employee engagement, recruitment and hiring, and identifying and addressing barriers to diversity and inclusion. There are several ways that we're approaching this, kind of like Matt was just saying. There's multiple pathways. We are working on DEI at all levels of the organization across all of our programs and regions. For instance, our leadership deputies have done a heck of a lot of work in the past couple of years around improving recruitment and hiring practices. And I could spend a whole lot of time sharing those accomplishments, and we probably ought to put that together at some point and put that on the community of practice. We also have created this internal team that I just mentioned to develop recommendations to improve the services culture so that we're more inclusive and welcoming. We define that as a workplace where all employees feel respected, safe, valued, and included. So I was asked to talk about the strategies, tactics we're addressing in the roadmap. The strategy is one that both Ann and Sarah shared, and that is to commit to, recruit, and retain diverse values and perspectives within the agency workforce. Step 1, Sarah just showed you, is leadership demonstrates support for a diverse and inclusive workforce. Our tactic there is we do have the policies and working environments as listed in the in the relevancy roadmap to support diversity and inclusion. We have an executive diversity committee that meets monthly to ensure that the diversity and inclusion implementation plan is on track. In fact, 1 or 2 of those executive diversity committee members are attending this workshop today, and I'm really glad to see them. Step 2 under that strategy to commit to the diverse values and perspectives in the workforce is to change hiring practices to attract and recruit more diverse staff at all levels. Again, all of the deputies in the Fish and Wildlife Service have come together and have been working on this for a number of years and have created policies and procedures that ensure equitable hiring practices, having panels involved in selections during interview processes, removing other biases from the hiring processes, and developing, we've just got a new team started to develop targeted recruitment strategies. Step 3 under this strategy in the roadmap is to create an environment that is inclusive and supports diverse opinions and voices in decision-making at all levels. And this is again where the workplace culture transformation team, we just stood that up. It represents diverse perspectives across the service, and it has developed recommendations to our senior leaders around policies and practices that value and support the needs of all of our staff. And again, it's based on input. This team sought input from many proponents of change, folks within the organization who are working on this actively at the grassroots level. And speaking of grassroots level, there's been a lot of encouragement and support of staff expressing diverse opinions and solving problems creatively and inclusively through grassroots efforts. We have a brand new LGBTQ+ employee resource group, first one ever for the Fish and Wildlife Service, first employee resource group for the Fish and Wildlife Service. They've been very active in raising awareness within the Fish and Wildlife Service. And we have an institutional change community of practice, which is growing rapidly. And it's, again, grassroots level with a lot of folks working on all sorts of issues like language bias and thinking of even bigger ideas. We also, the third tactic under that step is to measure staff satisfaction and adopt policies and practices accordingly. We have built accountability into our diversity and inclusion implementation plan. And we also have regularly administer a number of surveys, including a recently developed climate survey that really measured how included staff feel among other types of efforts around climate within the Fish and Wildlife Service. Some regions have even gone so far as to adopt the Gallup Q12 survey, and that is really great because as long as you have a work unit of 4 people who responded, you will get the results for your work unit, and you can work through those individual work units to really improve employee engagement. So those are the steps and the tactics we've been employing. Our biggest challenge today, and I'm putting this before our major accomplishment, is that the challenge I think is facing a lot of folks, although I haven't really heard it as much today, but is how do we create awareness? The Fish and Wildlife Service is anywhere from 7,000 to 8,000 to 9,000 employees across the country and into Guam and other places. And so creating that awareness and really engaging staff and getting broad engagement in and ownership of these efforts has been really challenging. We have a dispersed organizational structure and staff, many staff are still unaware of a lot of these efforts. And you know, another challenge we do is we tend to tap the same people that do the work. We know that Natalie is really into this, and so we're going to engage Natalie, our social scientist, in all of this work. So that's our challenge. Again, really communication and raising awareness and engagement. The major accomplishment, there's many, again, the hiring practices is really significant, but the one I want to share is the support and recognition of grassroots efforts by our leadership. More and more staff are engaging in formal and informal grassroots efforts to affect change in the service. And as a result, there's a lot more energy and synergy and learning across the service. There's ideas that are surfacing that our team has been able to use to create the recommendations that are going directly to leadership to consider. So these grassroots groups have created mechanisms for communicating with these proponents of change, or the allies is another word that we call them. But most importantly, in our very large siloed organization, it is really helping. These grassroots efforts are helping break down those silos. I'm working with people in Alaska and refugees that I would have never spoken to before. Staff are feeling empowered to create a more inclusive and diverse workforce. And while we also need the leadership from the top, as in step one, we're getting this great grassroots effort as well. And so that's my story.
And you're sticking to it. Thank you, Elsa, very much. Great progress there. Okay, this is great. This has flown by. And again, folks, my gosh, I wish we were all together and we could just talk about this stuff and ask and answer all the questions that are coming in and that we have. But we can't, so let's deal with what we have. One question, Chris Smith, I'm going to ask you to answer this one because I know you have been on the chat. The question that came in is that in terms of agency diversity, there remains a number of institutional obstacles to recruiting a more diverse workforce. So to some degree, our hands are a bit tied up. In some cases, civil service human resource policy laws need to change. I'd like to hear more discussion about those very real barriers, perhaps case studies on breaking down those barriers. How would you answer that, Chris?
Well, I was actually starting to answer it in a couple of different chats there, but you know, I think one of the things, and we had a really good discussion about this in diversity working group earlier or last week, I guess. One of the things that we can do is look very carefully at the job descriptions and the minimum requirements that we have. In many cases, the way the hiring process works is applications will come into some human resources department where they're screened by someone who really doesn't understand what our field is, but they're looking for key words or phrases in applications that tie to a specific job description or to certain course requirements. And if we're not careful about how those minimum qualifications or job descriptions are worded, they may create barriers that are unintended, that we're not even really aware of. So that would be one opportunity. Scott Anderson suggested that using other ways to build stepping stones, creating paid internships and additional opportunities for younger people who want to get into the field but don't come from some of the traditional backgrounds or have economic barriers. Those are ways to help overcome some of those.
Okay, appreciate it. And as I'm looking, now that we're almost done, the chat is really starting to heat up. So again, I wish we had more time, but we don't. But let me emphasize, this kind of a forum, these ideas getting exchanged, the lived experiences of all these people in this room and those of so many more that aren't here are how we keep moving forward on the roadmap. So again, go to the community website, let's log in. If you have ideas for webinars, short podcasts, little videos, content that would be helpful to all of us on the community, if it's just hosting another discussion, that's the place to go and propose that stuff. Also, you can email me, you can email any of the folks on the Relevancy Roadmap implementation group. We talk every several weeks. So we're working on this. Give us your ideas, help us know how we can facilitate this stuff going forward, because as you can see, when one question gets asked, 18 more pop up. That's an excellent symptom in my case of the need for a community solution or remedy to learning these things that we have to. So in the last 5 minutes, I do not want to take that up. I'm going to shut up and simply say thank you all for on this this Monday, halfway through the AFWA virtual meeting, for hanging in there, joining us, listening. We want you to stay with us. Also, when I stop talking here, I'll send you a post survey. Yes, another one. Sorry, get used to it. That's how I attain knowledge. Just take 3 minutes. Click on the link real quick, give us a little bit of feedback, where your head is at after listening to all these folks, because the more we learn from you, the better we can make these learning resources going into the future. So I'm going to send that here in just a second. And Elsa, I'd like to pass it back to you for just sort of summation of where your thoughts are on the overarching themes of today, and maybe a little bit vision on what we should all be thinking about in the future.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. And thanks everybody for a great session. And thanks to all of you for hanging in there. It's really heartening to see so many folks still with us. Today we heard about Missouri forming a relevancy branch. Wouldn't that be great to have that for all of us? A huge lesson that I've taken from this whole conference, from the opening plenary and beyond, is the need to ask and to listen. Really listen to what people want. Thinking about, Matt's silly question, how do we increase awareness of the benefits of conservation? And as Anne pointed out, not necessarily have everybody involved, but have increased support, even if they're not directly involved in conservation. And Matt reiterated how to get started. There's multiple pathways. Hopefully we've given you some food for thought. All of us, as everyone has said, we're all here for each other, the community of practice, to get some ideas to jumpstart how you get started. Challenges we heard today: my internet connection is unstable, so I'll be quick. Capacity, and we've seen that Missouri has created capacity with existing staff and with existing resources. The Fish and Wildlife Service is doing a little bit of that as well. I'd like to see them do a lot more. We're in a changing world, COVID in the virtual environment, and we've been adaptable and resilient. And I just think that's very exciting. We heard Jen talk about the tyranny of the urgent. How many of us face that every day? And yet she still found that they're able to carve out time and it's really super important. So really setting the priorities and sticking to them regardless of the tyranny of the urgent. We also heard a big challenge, at least in the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I hear it over and over again, about communication and really reaching out to everybody and making sure they feel included and that they are part of the efforts that are going on. And again, I just want to point out that we are resilient. We as a community, we have a long way to go. It took us about 87% of our history has been in built under oppression times, and we're not going to change overnight. Our systems, in conservation were built 100 years ago. It's going to take us time, so we all need to be patient. I know we're very impatient, but together we can collectively make the change that we need to do to really enhance conservation for the 21st and 22nd centuries and beyond, and really ensure that conservation is at the forefront of people's minds and capitalizing on COVID to help us do that. So like Matt and everybody, the rest of the coordinating team, I'd like to thank you for participating, and again, encourage you to contribute. We can't build this without you. You have to contribute and engage in that community of practice. And we look forward to further discussions and training, and fill out that survey, because we want to see you again in the next couple of months before the North American. We're going to do some training workshops based on what you tell us you need. So again, have a great rest of the conference tomorrow, everybody, and hope to see you at the awards ceremony here at 5 o'clock. See ya.
Thanks a lot.